All right, we are live on YouTube and recording on eScribe.
Gotta mute. All right, it is 1:10. I think some folks are still connecting to the meeting. But I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. And we'll start with roll call.
Anderson? Absent. Becerra? Absent. Carlino? Can everyone hear me? Yes.
Yeah, I think Daniel is absent today, but I'm sure Anderson and Becerra are probably still joining.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ensure. Contos?
I'm here.
Hess?
Present.
Jones?
Present.
Jordan.
She's absent.
Okay. Nugent. Absent.
I
Savage?
saw him.
I thought
no.
I saw him as well.
He's joining. It says it's connecting to audio.
Perfect. Savage. Right. Vasika.
Present.
West.
I'm present.
Right. Mike. Are you here now?
He might
Still
be having.
connecting. Amber, Cheryl's here as well.
Okay. Cheryl. Thank you. Okay. Okay.
So I think we've got 2 folks absent for sure. And I know I'll just say for the, I think Jordan's having some internet connectivity issues today, so no camera, but he's here. So the first item is to approve minutes. And so without any objections, we'll approve the minutes from July 20th, 2022. And then we'll move on to public comment. So this would be public comment on non-agenda items. There's Mike, he connected. He's here, as is Mirta. So this is your opportunity to comment on items that are not on the agenda. So if there's anyone who would like to comment, go ahead and raise your hand. And I am not seeing hands jump up, so we'll go ahead and, oh, there's one. Carol raised their hand, so you should be able to comment.
Yeah, hi. I just took a look at the study that you had, the Granicus study that got published in June of this year. And, as
So,
someone,
Carol,
yeah.
I think we'll be covering that later on in the agenda. Would you?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you had asked for public comments. Okay.
Just on
bye.
non-agenda items. Is there anyone
sorry.
else?
Bye-bye.
That's okay. Let's see. Is there anyone else who would like to comment on non-agenda items? I am not seeing hands go up. All right, so then let's go ahead and move on to our first item of committee business, which is the National Institute of Health agreement for project year 4. And Karen is here to present on this item.
Thanks, Heidi. I'm Karen Gasfoda, the City Grants Administrator with Community Planning Development and Innovation. This is a request for you to approve 4 National Institute of Health Grant Administration agreements and authorize the mayor to sign those agreements. The grant is now in year 4 of a 5-year, $1.3 million grant received in 2019 and awarded additional funding in 2021. The award funds the LINK project, a hub for health science learning, healthy living, and STEM role model engagement, and is part of that new library museum complex. The city retains all fiscal and reporting responsibilities associated with this grant. However, these agreements have no financial implications for the city budget and do not affect city funds. The entire project is funded by the National Institute of Health.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions about this item? I don't see any, so I'm looking for a motion, and then we'll go to comments. Mike?
Happy to make the motion as presented.
All right, thank you so much. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this agenda item? And I am also not seeing hands go up, so I'll turn it back over to council. Any council comments? And none either. So let's just move forward. So let's go ahead and take a roll call vote on on this item.
Right. Becerra.
Yes.
Contos.
Yes.
Hess. see. Is Jordan with us?
He's here.
He is.
We'll come back to him.
Okay, Jones,
Yes.
Nugent,
Yes.
Cheryl, I'll come back.
Yes, sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button.
That was a yes. Thank you. Vasika,
Yes.
West,
Yes.
and Hess.
And he said he had to step out for a moment.
Okay, all right. I cannot complete my vote. Let me see here. So as of right now, we have 7 yeses. We will wait on Hess, so motion is passed.
All right, thank you so much. So we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is the short-term rental data analysis, which I'm sure is what lots of folks are here to engage on. So I'll turn it over to Emily Harris-Shears. Or Ricky.
I think Montana's going to start.
Okay, Montana, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. Good afternoon. So my name is Montana James, Deputy Director with the Community Development Division in Community Planning, Development, and Innovation at the city. And with me today is Ricky Henderson, our Housing Programs Manager, and Emily Harris-Shears, our Housing Policy Specialist. And thank you for having us back again this week to speak to the short-term rental or tourist home research and analysis that we completed this summer. So a few weeks ago, we presented a bit of a more in-depth look at the data and analysis work that we undertook on this project, but we were a little crunched for time and didn't have the opportunity to really dig into questions. So over the course of the past few weeks, we've been collecting questions from council as well as the community, and really appreciate the opportunity to come back and answer these questions today. We especially appreciate the opportunity really to clarify that our primary takeaway and next step in this work is to continue to closely monitor the short-term rental landscape in Missoula and to collect more local qualitative data to better understand what's happening on the ground. This topic is really a nuanced and fluid policy issue with no one-size-fits-all silver bullet. And so our goal in making the recommendations that we have is to make sure that we're grounding any potential policy or ordinance next steps just in the realities, values, and experiences of our community members. So since it's been a few weeks since we last covered the topic, today we want to first review a higher level summary of the key data points from that research, review the recommendations for next steps that we shared with you last time, share some question themes from council members in the community, and then leave a good chunk of time for further discussion and questions as they come up. And all the documents should be attached again in the agenda item. So with that, I will turn it over to Ricky to provide a recap of the main data points and recommendations from July 20th.
Montana. We'll run through this kind of quickly since it is a review, but feel free to ask questions if you have any on the data points. So just a review of our current ordinance. It was adopted in 2016, requiring all registrants of all whole home short-term rentals. The current registration fee is $60 for the first year and then $31 for subsequent year renewals. And currently there are 100, and this number is of a couple of weeks ago, so it might have changed a little bit, but 110 short-term rentals currently registered with the city. And then compliance of those of the ordinance is complaints driven by neighbors. And Charmel Owens is on to answer any compliance questions that folks might have as we go forward. So the rental market, and I'll give a data note on this again. This was compiled back in April from the Granicus report, and we do have The ability to take a peek, and we looked a couple of weeks ago and the numbers were pretty consistent. I believe it was about 489, if I'm remembering correctly. But that 445 number seems to be about average for the year from what we've seen. We've seen lower in the range of 300, and I think the high we've seen is around that 489 number. This is unique rental units. So there are sometimes units that list on multiple sites. And so sometimes you will see numbers cited that are higher than this. But this is the number that's reached by Granicus's ability to dedupe from all of those cross listings. As we noted before, the Riverfront and Heart of Missoula neighborhoods have the greatest concentration of short-term rentals. And then we did note through the Granicus numbers that there was about a 25% increase in the number of listings from early 2020 to today. Of those units that are currently listed, 61% are in single-family units. 95% of the short-term rentals rent the entire unit, with only 5% renting individual bedrooms. The majority of the listings are for 1 or 2 bedroom units. And the current average nightly rate for all short-term rental listings in the city is $150 a night. This is sort of a breakdown, and we just wanted to highlight some of this. I think we rushed through this a little bit last time, but this is a breakdown comparing our market to other neighboring communities and other communities in the state. I will note that this is short-term listings, and the reason that is different than when we've been talking about units is because Granicus didn't contract with these other cities to dedupe the lists. So they used the listing number so that it was comparable. But again, that 585 is not individual units, that was listings. So including those duplicated ones. But as you can see, Missoula's comparison to other communities, we have a relatively small number of listings per 100,000 household or per 1,000 households, and our nightly rate is 150. So you can see we're a bit higher than Billings, but significantly lower than more resort style communities like Whitefish and Jackson Hole, where they see much higher concentration of short-term rental listings and much higher rental rates. So majority of the listings that we were able to find in the data did not have any estimated bookings in the last year. This number is a little bit tough to come by. The way that Granicus finds this is through pulling monthly data reports and seeing ones that are, I'm trying to remember how they describe this, that are listed but not occupied for the majority of that month. So that number moves around a lot, which is why it's hard, because individual units change. They'll be listed one month, not listed the next month. And so finding that average is tough, but the estimation based on number of bookings and number of nights listed across the board, rather than looking at individual units, told us that the majority of those listings, so over 50%, did not have any bookings in the previous year. 141 listings rented for over 120 nights per year. 53 total units generate over $25,000 in income. So those are sort of the bigger earners and ones that we can assume are rented full-term or full-time as short-term rentals. The break-even point for long-term renting versus short-term renting is 40 to 60 nights per year, and that depends on how often they're booked and how much they're renting for. And then at least 300 of our short-term rental units exceed that break-even point, and so are renting for more than 40 to 60 nights per year. So we wanted to review, and this got a little bit rushed last time, so I wanted to make sure that folks understood what we were recommending. And I think there was, based on some community feedback that we got, there was some concern that we weren't taking this problem serious enough, but we want to really emphasize and explain a little bit about some of these next steps that we did recommend. As we talked about last time, there's a lot of nuance behind these units, both from the side of folks who are listing the units and from the side of folks who are renting the units. So what we've heard and what we've seen in the data is that we don't know yet if a majority or what number of these units are rented full-time as short-term rentals, which feels like a weird thing to say, but I hope you understand what I mean by that. They're permanently available for short-term rentals versus ones that are owner-occupied for some or most of the year and then occasionally rented as short-term rentals. So we don't know that information yet. We also don't know the information about folks who are renting the units. What we've heard through some of our feedback that we've gotten on both this study and some additional displacement work that we've been doing as a department is that sometimes these units are utilized by folks who live in the community, not just by tourists. And so folks who are between rentals, folks who are displaced from a long-term rental while they're waiting to get into another rental. We've heard stories of folks who had damage done to their house and they lived in a short-term rental while they were waiting for repairs. We've heard from folks that members of our refugee community are utilizing these as they wait for longer-term rentals. So there's a lot of nuance behind who's renting these as well as who is putting these up to rent. So that is why we propose more of an active monitoring of these tourist homes and the ability to continue the work that we've been doing to check on those numbers regularly to see if there is an increase. And if we do see spikes, then coming back to you all for more recommendations on how we can keep an eye on that and maybe make some additional recommendations on regulations or changes to the ordinance as those numbers dictate. Also, we would like to update the annual tourist home registration form to allow us to collect more information about what these rentals are, how often they're being rented, whether or not they're owner occupied, that sort of thing. So that's sort of our main recommendation. The other thing that we talked about last time that we've received some questions on was a recommendation around increasing the registration fee to meet industry standard. So that industry standard is a recommendation of 2 to 3 times the average nightly rate, which would bring that fee to $300 to $450 annually. This fee increase would allow us to do more of that proactive monitoring. It would allow us to continue our contract with Granicus and continue actively watching that marketplace. I will point out that this is any continued monitoring is budget dependent. Currently, our contract with Granicus is ended. And so any kind of monitoring that we do moving forward would need to be budgeted for, or we would need to collect additional fees to cover that. So those are sort of our possible next steps. And overall, we'd like to continue actively monitoring the short-term rental market and to route conversations about any needs for code change through the Comprehensive Code Reform Project. And we do have some folks who are working on that project who are here as well to answer questions. So I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to Emily to talk a little bit more about some of the themes around questions we've been getting from folks.
Hey, Ricky, Emily, before you get started, can I ask 2 very specific questions about your part of the presentation?
Sure.
And so the first one was how that $25,000 of income was calculated. Is that just purely just income, but not looking at, you know, like potential mortgages or something that owners might be paying? Was that taken out and that's profit, or is it just income overall?
Ooh. I think that it is just income overall. I don't think we have the data to collect on that profit margin. So that was based on Granicus's review of units that were booked for a certain number of nights. So
thank you. That's super helpful. I just, and then could you just really briefly explain how these short-term rentals fit into our existing ordinance if they're owner occupied? You did a great job of covering it at the last meeting, but I just thought that would be helpful for everyone who's in attendance.
Yes, I think so. Montana, I'm going to have you correct me if I'm wrong because there was some nuance behind it. I think the answer is our ordinance is a little bit vague on that. But I believe currently if units are owner occupied for a majority of the year, they are not required to register. What that means is a little bit vague. So
thank you. And then is it okay if I take some questions from council if it's specific to your presentation, or would you rather?
Sure. I think, well, my only hesitation is Emily's going to go through some of the questions, so she might already answer them if folks don't mind waiting for her to dig into that.
Jordan, are you okay with that, or is it specific to? So, okay, thank you. All right, Emily, go ahead.
All right. Hi. So we've had some really good discussions with community and received some questions from council in our 2-week break from talking about short-term rentals with you. I just want to highlight that we received questions and comments from council members Jones, Carlino, and West. So these are reflected in the summary. And then we also received inquiries from the community. And we're going to share the common requests and feedback themes, and just some additional information that hopefully adds more context that we didn't necessarily have time to go through on the 20th. So the questions were centered around registration, community impact, and further context and data analysis. So in the first of registration, the questions centered around the plan to address unregistered short-term rentals, what the time period was or is for reporting units that are no longer listed but were not registered, and the housing type makeup between single family homes and ADUs. So as Ricky shared, one of our primary recommendations is to update the tourist home registration form. And that will help us collect more information from operators and really have that qualitative data, like Montana was saying, about what's happening on the ground. So we don't necessarily know right now about the split between accessory dwelling units or single family homes, but that may be something that we can learn through more information from operators. We also, right now in the data, just have the assumption that they're being counted as single family because they're counted as whole homes, but that's something that we could confirm through the data. And additionally, we recommend doing proactive outreach to operators to really address this unregistered component that have had a unit listed but are not registered, to increase that registration rate and communicate that there is an expectation of registration. We also think, or just want to highlight, I know we've been talking about capacity and our current ability to do these things. The activity to do that proactive outreach is currently outside of our capacity and would require allocated budget to contract with Granicus to send letters and support more of this active outreach. Collecting more information, though, will allow us to learn about the types of units and circumstances that operators are listing their units in, and really help us understand the proportion of sporadic listings of accessory dwelling units, whole homes, all of those pieces. So, rather than making assumptions from this data set, we want to really collect more from residents. And then we also received a few questions and comments about community impact. I think that just generally, I think the impression was made that because it's 1.5% of our housing market, that we're not recommending intervention. And that's not true, as Ricky and Montana highlighted. But we do want to talk a little bit more about some of that framing. And I think they both covered a lot of it already. But we're not recommending, so to start with the moratorium, we're not recommending a moratorium on new short-term rentals or registrations currently. And part of that is because the current data indicates that registration is not a barrier for people to list and operate short-term rentals. And so while we have a large share of listings that are not registered, we don't think that that will actually impact the market or the experience that people are having in regard to short-term rentals, because it's being done without registration at this time. We need to know more about the circumstances for that, and we don't think that, we just don't think it would have the impact that we're intending. Additionally, monitoring for a measure like that would take additional staff capacity and something that we would need to plan for and make room in our work plan for. So we're mindful about measures that would potentially inspire intervention. And we're also just thinking largely about, like, we're coming into a new legislative session and we want to be thoughtful about measures that we might implement or propose that could potentially inspire intervention from the state legislature that might challenge our ability to implement our current approach or any potential future recommendations. And then there is a question raised by Councilmember Jordan at the end of the meeting on the 20th that I wanted to just make sure that we revisited. We also heard from a community partner about this. So 300 units that are currently unregistered is not an insignificant component of our housing stock, but without additional information, we can't assume that those units would return to the market or what the rental costs of those units would be. So one of the community members who reached out about this said, wouldn't we be excited if a 300 unit apartment complex came online? And related it to similarly like the enthusiasm around the Bellagio and the Trinity and what that will do to the capacity in our system. And that's really where I want to elevate that number of units isn't insignificant, but because we can't guarantee that they will all go back to the market, that's where we want to really take the time to do more data collection, to understand the use that people are doing them in, so then we can understand where we really kind of pull the levers that we do have and be thoughtful about that. So yes, additional housing stock is always great. We don't really have the assurance here that this would do that. And so it's something for us to be thoughtful about. We also just, looking at the data that we did have from Granicus in the study, we can just make some kind of hypotheses about the usage data, including that most listings didn't have a booking in the previous year, that 141 listings rent for over 120 nights per year, and then also the income measure. We can just kind of make some hypotheses about that there is likely most units are being used as a primary residence and then listed sporadically. And so because somebody already lives in that home, it wouldn't be adding to our stock. It's already accounted for in our use in our market. So one thing that we started doing on the 1st is we are recording the dashboard numbers from Granicus each day so that we can track some trends over time. And we can look at, high seasons of football, and we can look at graduations and other seasons where people really want to be in Missoula. And so that is something that we'll be able to provide as we go. Just a caveat that we have our current dashboard subscription until November. And so we will at least be able to provide that data till then. And then we also consulted with the city attorney's office on the question of potentially directing a portion of the registration fee to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And the initial thought is that if it's not a building code regulation, it is not required for the funds to be directed solely to code enforcement or other relevant activities. So it's definitely something that we can keep exploring further and would be feasible if the registration fee were increased. But the current fee structure doesn't net a considerable amount of revenue, so there wouldn't really be anything to divert funding from at this time. And then we also I didn't add this on the slide, but we heard from a community member that operates a short-term rental and shared a perspective that while the fee with development services is nominal, there are other fees associated with registering with the health department and other departments, and that, to be thoughtful about an increase that could potentially impact some owners. So just wanted to make sure that comment was reflected as well. And then we also received a bunch of questions about wanting to know more and drill deeper into the data and the characteristics of what was shared in the study. And we do have the ability to pull some of that data and would give more information, but at this time, because we're proposing to do forward-looking qualitative analysis with some of the tools that we recommend, we aren't really recommending that we go backwards into the study and do more deep drilling into that data because we know that it was a point in time in April. It's still meaningful to the context of this full discussion, but spending more time understanding that rather than prioritizing our time and resources and looking forward in collecting more data just may not really, I guess the question that I had, the way I summarized it was like, to what end? In that we could actually be looking at more time specific and real-time data if we prioritize our time that way. So our recommended actions of collecting more information from operators and then also the tools that we do have, watching the listing rates throughout the year and communicating proactively with operators will help us firm up our data set moving forward. And then we can do that analysis on present data that accounts for some of this context that people have questions about. So that's the bulk of the summary. So I'll stop sharing and then we're happy to take more questions.
Thank you. I really appreciate taking the time to really address all of the questions that were and comments that were sent in the last couple of weeks. Jordan.
Thanks. I really appreciate the helpful presentation and all the work on this as well. I guess I have two questions, and my first one was for Ricky, and it's probably pretty specific. I don't fully understand the significance of, or I guess maybe you can help me wrap my head around the thing that you said that the majority of listings had no bookings in the previous year. That seems really, I guess it seems really counterintuitive. And I was wondering if you were surprised by that, or if that indicates, I mean, does that indicate that there's a bunch of new units that are just now online and weren't listed, or does it indicate that people list things so sporadically that they just may not ever get a booking, or some combination? Or are there any trends that we can get from that?
Yeah, we had a lot of the same questions for Granicus. The way they described it to us, again, and this was like a point in time versus yearly averages that we were looking at, so it's hard to go unit for unit to answer that. But what they described is there's sort of two things that happen. People will list, forget to take it down. And so even though it's not active, and I guess the way most of these listing sites work, you supply them with the dates on your calendar that it's available. And so people would list it, not supply any dates, and then it would not be available. So that would be one example of why that would happen. And then the other is that it is exactly like you said, it's too sporadic to show up month by month. So it would be things we expect, and we anticipate that it would be things like it was listed for Grizz game weekends, or it was listed for graduation weekends, but not other times of the year. So it wasn't showing up in significant ways as they did a month by month analysis. So we'll be able to dig into that more, as Emily mentioned, with this monthly check that we want to do between now and November. But yeah, that's sort of what that implies to us, is that it's sporadic listings or listings that were posted but never actually intended to book or never removed from the sites.
Okay, thanks. A follow-up?
Go for it.
So it would be, I guess it doesn't appear as though there's just a ton of new listings that are causing that either. That's not borne out in the data.
No, that wasn't. And we can't say for sure, but we keep coming back to these. The two numbers that we keep coming back to are, I think it's without my slide in front of me, I think it's 142 units that were listed for more than 120 nights a year, and then the 52 that made more than 25,000. In our analysis, and from what we can tell, those are likely the ones that are rented or that are listed full term, is those 142 units. Otherwise, and we can't say this for sure without digging into it more, but otherwise it doesn't seem to pencil out, and we don't know where that break-even point is. So
okay, great. And I have one more question about the registration fees. I was wondering if it would be possible or legal or even advisable to base the listing fees on how much the unit makes. So maybe it's based on a percentage of receipts for the unit being rented, or something that sort of might recognize that a unit that is rented full-time does have potentially a different impact on our housing stock than a unit that's rented on a short-term basis and possibly rented in other capacities at other times of year.
yeah, Emily, I'll let you take that one because you. chatted with Ryan about it.
Yeah, I did ask about that, and we were cautioned from creating a structure that may be similar or seen similar as a tax. And so if there's a justifiable reason why units that are listed more have more compliance or regulatory need, there could be a justification for increasing that fee. But we have to be cautious about that. So it would need a lot more exploration.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I'm not surprised by that either. Thanks.
Gwen?
Yeah, I'm not surprised. We don't want a regressive regulatory scheme, but we just might have to have one. So, so I didn't really have a question, but well, I had a few comments, and I wanted to say, first of all, thanks for all of the work on this. And I think to say it's nuanced is a bit of an understatement of the year type scenario, because yeah, it's complicated. There's so many different parts to it and impact on the community, positive and negative. And it's just, I really appreciate that you guys are combing through this bit of a black hole of an issue, but it's necessarily, and we need to have a good community discussion on it. And that's what we're doing, and figure out the way forward. I did want to draw your attention to one theme I've heard from constituents, which is people who are really concerned about this impacting housing want to not have people who are from out of state come in and be able to buy houses and rent them out as short-term rentals, which I totally understand that sentiment. But I've also been very cautious in saying, I'd have to see if that's legal. I just don't know that that would be legal, that we honestly could do any kind of a regulatory scheme like that. And I did communicate with Jim Nugent and Ryan Sudbury regarding this, and I will send the email on to you, Montana, and Ricky and Emily, so you could put it in the file. But basically it's the Montana State Constitution has some inalienable rights, which include acquiring, possessing, and protecting property. So there's that. There's also the Equal Protection Clause under the United States Constitution. And then there are powers denied to local governments, which include any power affecting any private or civil relationship. So yeah, I don't think we can regulate in that form or fashion. I understand the concern from people in the community, especially regarding affordable housing and how this issue overlaps with that, but we can't. I just wanted to communicate that, because I think that has been a common refrain that I have heard, and we can't really go there in terms of regulations. So I will send that information on to your ever increasing file on this topic. And I also think I'm super supportive of getting more information in for the next year, because I think one key thing to me is trending. What's our trend on this? Are we going up? Are we still holding steady, et cetera? And then in code reform, if there are some drawing on their expertise to how to address a pretty squirrely issue to regulate. So I thank you for your thoughts on that.
Mike?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of questions, but I think they're all quick. First one, just for staff. I had a conversation the other day with a former city council member and a housing advocate who was concerned that Granicus is an industry company, for lack of a better word, and that maybe they've got an angle. Everything I've read online, I can't support that, but I'm curious. I wasn't on council when we chose them. Do they have a pretty good background in doing this sort of data collection and research for other municipalities?
Sure, I can start, and Emily and Ricky, if you have thoughts, jump in. Yeah, so we went through a process of interviewing 3 different firms and really software platforms that do this work in the fall of last year. And Granicus came out on top just because of the range of tools and the power of their platform, but in addition, their relationship with some experts who work on the policy side and have worked on actually ordinances regulating short-term rentals across the country. So that pairing was particularly appealing to us, that they had both kind of the software technology side, but also the policy and legislating side of expertise as well. To my knowledge, I don't think of them as like an industry company, Granicus is a big government software company. So they have a number of different platforms that all work particularly with local government to support processes like fees, registrations, building codes. They have a pretty wide range of products, but really, to my knowledge, most entirely work with government and not with industry.
Perfect. Thank you, Montana. I wanted kind of that answer to be out there. In our budget presentation last week from Destination Missoula, they indicated that slightly over 1,000 units pay bed tax in Missoula County. I'm curious how much of that information is even available for you to compare this list to, or if we have any thoughts on why the discrepancy between our number and that number. And I understand that we're just the city and that's the county, but that is a number that I've heard some people reach out and ask about.
I think where we've seen that number pop up a couple times is on the AirDNA site, which is actually an industry site that provides information encouraging people to set up short-term rentals. And from what we've seen, it kind of inflates the numbers that folks can make off of doing that. And so I think that that might be part of it. And I think that that 1,000 number that we've seen is indicative of listings and not units. And so listing units that are listed on multiple sites. But if someone has a better answer to that.
I would also, I wasn't there for that presentation, so I'm not sure, but I would be curious if that includes things like actual bed and breakfasts and other types of rentals in addition to just like tourist homes or short-term rentals.
Yeah, I was hoping she didn't go into any more detail. It seemed like she was just talking about Airbnbs, but it didn't seem like they had as much information behind that as I was maybe hoping you would have. So it's not possible to get any sort of list to see what addresses are paying bed taxes. That's not a public domain from anybody.
My understanding is that the sites pay the bed tax directly to the state. And so the state doesn't report out that information.
Okay.
That's what Granicus informed us on.
Perfect. Madam Chair, I have 2 more questions on enforcement, if you'll allow them.
Perfect. Yeah, and then we'll.
Thanks. Does when we're talking about enforcement and if this is something we wanted to prioritize, does Granicus have the ability to do the initial enforcement, like compare our registered list to the list they're getting? And I guess I'm sure they do, but do we have any idea of what the cost for that sort of service might be?
Yeah, they do. They have a number of different options for their host compliance software, which is what we started with in the fall. And so they can, what their platform does right now is compare our registered units with all of the daily postings on a range of 80 different short-term rental sites. So that data is there, but then in addition, they can offer basically a letter service where they process batches of letters out to listed units that are not registered with us to do that kind of initial data collection that we talked about and just share information about the ordinance. They don't have a limit on the number of letters. So I think some communities have them send up to 4 or 5 letters before taking another action on a property. So there's a pretty wide range of tools, but they can provide that service and it would increase that in addition to using their platform for actual registration to sort of sync up the data of local registration with the platform listings would increase our annual subscription to about $20,000 a year.
Last question.
Perfect. I was hoping I'd get one more. Some people in the community have suggested we should just ban short-term rentals in residentially zoned areas. My question on that front is, if we were to do that in our zoning code, would the properties already registered with the city be grandfathered in to that sort of change? In other words, we couldn't just change the rules and tell people who have been following them currently that they can't do it anymore, correct?
That's a good question. I am not entirely sure, but I'm wondering if Ben from the planning side, if you have thoughts.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone.
No.
This is Ben Brewer with CPDI, and I think that's something we would need to check in with our city attorneys on. But my best first response is that that would not necessarily be the case, because these are registered on a yearly basis, and so they're registered for that time frame. And if the rules were to change, that then they would be unable to register. But that's a bit of a shaky response.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
I'll, along those lines, if I could share, I did a little research into other communities and what they've done in terms of different regulations. And Wilmington, South Carolina did a similar thing. They put a restriction on the number of units, and existing units that were beyond that, they did a lottery system to determine which ones got to stay. And they were very quickly sued and lost their ability to regulate them at all. And in the meantime, the state legislature passed laws limiting all municipalities' ability to regulate. So there is some precedence that it feels like it would probably be illegal.
Thank you, Ricky. Amber?
I think Jim has his hand up, and I'm guessing he has something more helpful. to
Yes,
say
we'll
than
turn it
I-
over to Jim first.
I just wanted to point out that if there's a land use that exists and then the zoning regulation is adopted banning that land use, you probably have legal non-conforming use law that you have to deal with. And if they pre-existed the regulation, they're going to be legal non-conforming uses.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's what I was wondering, is it just that number is just not as large as people think.
Sounds great. Amber?
Okay, thanks. Appreciate the presentation, and it is a nuanced issue. And I personally like the idea of continuing to kind of track this, because with one snapshot, I don't think we fully understand what's going on and the trajectory of it. It's also been kind of weird times, and I wonder if some of those some of those registered but not rented out. I mean, some of that could be COVID related, who knows? So I really like the idea of continuing to look. So are continuing to track this information. So I have a couple of questions, if that's okay, Heidi. They're kind of simple questions because Mike asked a couple of mine. So when you say the break even point, you said 40 to 60 days. Is that based on just the assumption of what that property would rent for if it was a long-term rental? I'm just curious how that number came up.
They compare, oh, Ricky, do you want to do it? They compared Missoula Organization of Realtors data with our short-term data to look at the averages for both. And so that's how they did it. And they did it by unit size. And so that's where you get the 40 to 60 threshold.
Okay, thanks. And then I want to understand how, if I decided I wanted to rent my house as a short-term rental tomorrow, how would I know that I need to register? Like, what is the process of, I mean, is it that I go onto Airbnb or VRBO or whatever, and it tells me to register, or do I need to know that I need to register? I mean, I'm just kind of wondering how an individual even comes to realize they need to do that.
Yeah, that's a good question. And they don't flag you on Airbnb or VRBO. And I think we chatted a little bit about this last time, but I think there are some communities, very large communities, who have worked with the platforms to include some sort of registration number or license number requirement on the platform. But that's pretty hard to do, especially for a small community like ours. I'm not sure, Ben or Charmel, I'm trying to think of folks who could speak to that process. But we have a website, a web page that talks about our ordinance and provides a step-by-step in the registration form and all of the requirements. But you do have to sort of know to go to that page and be informed on it, I believe.
And I just want to add, if you're just registering it for a weekend or while you're out of town visiting family, you wouldn't have to register it. You could just list it on Airbnb because it'd still be your primary residence.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is how we, as we think about this kind of moving forward, how we, for lack of a better word, market the fact that they need to register, because right now the registration fee is not much of a deterrent to not register, and we don't have regulations around it. So why would I not register? So, I mean, like, I just think that's something that we should be thoughtful about as we move forward, especially if we're going to have enforcement and any penalties around it, and making sure that it is something that everyone knows needs to be done and all of our processes are simplified.
Amber, this is Charmel. I'm in agreement with you. When we initially talked about registration in the beginning, there was a lot of publicity that came out about it. So people were encouraged to come out and register. And I think that if we did another push and did a lot more education and a lot more outreach, we may get people to voluntarily do that. I just think that the pandemic had a huge sway on some of this data myself.
And I would just add, I think that's exactly why we propose the recommendations we do. We propose soft outreach, right? If folks are listing their unit and are not registered with us, the first letter or few letters would be information sharing, asking for information back, not an immediate move to punitive action or enforcement action.
Thank you. So I'll do Sandra and Jennifer, and then if we could move to public comments on this item, and then if council has more questions, we can come back. I just want to make sure we have some time for our last agenda item. So Sandra.
Thanks. I have two quick questions. Are these short-term rentals subject to the hotel tax?
Yeah, Montana.
They, in our registration information, and again, Charmel or Ben or others, let me know if I'm missing this, there is a requirement that they register with the state and pay bed tax, in addition to some health department requirements as well.
Okay, and then my last question, if the city does want to put on more regulations for these short-term rentals, will it go through council for a vote, or will it just be written into the code?
I can answer that. Yeah, any changes to the code would go through council.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Jennifer.
Thank you. And I had a couple of questions in terms of the continuing to monitor the situation. I realize you said we're only under contract with Granicus until I think you said November. And I'm just curious, like in that process, what is the sort of, are there any kind of clear next steps in engaging the owners of Airbnbs and in engaging the people who are using the Airbnbs? I know you had said you wanted to talk to them, and I'm just curious if there are any specific next steps, and does that fall within the work of the housing office, or does it fall within Granicus? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I can start, and Ricky or Emily jump in, or Ben or others. So what we would like to do, I think ideally, is we would have the Granicus platform and then add on the letter tool, for lack of a better word, where they are actually doing that monitoring and doing that look on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to compare legally registered tourist homes with all of those that are listed, and doing that letter outreach. We would do that collaboratively, where we can give them templates and the information we want them to include in letters, the first letter, second letter, third letter. And so we could set that. And they have seen pretty high compliance rates with even just one letter. A recent community that I looked at, they went from a pretty low compliance rate up to about 70% with just one letter doing that outreach and saying, hey, here's the ordinance, this is the requirement, come here to get signed up. So that is what we would recommend, but again, that is budget dependent. So our ability to contract with Granicus to provide that service to the city of Missoula and the community is dependent on a budget allocation. And short of that, we don't have the internal staff capacity to do that kind of more intensive monitoring. as the current fee structure and staffing stands right now.
Can I have a follow-up, Heidi?
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of the staff, this sort of staff capacity, I'm just curious, with the application the way that it stands, there's a fairly significant health department component to that also incidentally is $250. And so with $100 re-review, so if you don't, pass it the first time, you have to have a $100 resubmit on that as well. So, I mean, I think that needs to get added into the conversation of fees, even though the current fee seems to only be at $60 for the short-term, rental application. There's also a business license fee. And there's a completely separate process for registering for the lodging and sales tax, the bed tax piece. So it's not without a fair number of pieces. And so I'm just curious, though, if you have any sense of, or if in the study you were able to evaluate the amount of time, staff time it takes for the health department to complete these, what seem to be fairly extensive inspections, I guess is the right word.
Yeah, that was not part of this study or this research. It really just looked at units and housing market. So we haven't looked into that. I'm not sure. I'm looking to see if we still have Aaron Bowman on the building side or any folks who are involved in that process that have any thoughts, but it's not something that we took on in this study.
Okay. And then one more, Heidi.
So I can answer a little bit of that for you, Jennifer. Only because I'm there during the inspections that the health department does. I do know that just their on-site inspection is a multi-hour inspection process. So I do know that it is fairly onerous on their side.
And I wonder if there's just any conversation around potentially streamlining that process as you guys do revisit the application.
And I think that would be something that would have to be brought up with the county. I don't think that that's probably something that city staff would be involved in, since we don't dictate anything that the city county health department does in their process.
Okay. And the last one, Heidi, and then I'll be quiet.
Yeah.
I just wondered if there's any other sort of communication plan or strategy other than letters out to folks. Is there any other sort of, I don't know what it would be, educational kind of component that might go into letting folks know that they do have to register? I think Amber brought up a really great point, like how do you know if you don't know and you're not in the know? So I just wonder if there's any other piece other than the letters in an outreach campaign.
There's not any additional outreach or campaign that we've talked about at this point. I think, like Charmel said, there was some pretty intensive outreach and process when the first ordinance went into effect in, I think, 2016. But we haven't talked about any kind of bigger additional outreach at this point.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you for all of those answers. We'll go ahead and go to public comment. And the first person who has their hand up is Whitney B.
Hi there, can you all hear me?
We can.
Okay, so my name is Whitney Bergman, and I will try to be brief because I hope there are several people here to comment. I am the general manager of the Best Western Grant Creek here in Missoula, and I've worked here for a long time. I also want to clarify that I work here. I don't own this property, so I have nothing to sort of personally gain by speaking out regarding STRs. I'm also a person who was priced out of Missoula for housing personally. I was not able to afford to buy a home here, so I have a personal investment. But I think because of my involvement in the lodging industry, it's kind of put me in a unique position where I have a lot of this information and I understand a lot of it and a lot of kind of why I feel like I was priced out of housing in Missoula. And so I just want to review a few comments with the council if possible. I also want to mention I am the chair of the tourism bid, so the TBID, Missoula TBID. So a couple just quick comments from what I've heard today. I feel like there was a lot of conversation and a lot of language about how like even in the presentation, it was referred to as kind of a small issue in our community based on the number of rentals that we see in the Granicus report. I think we saw like 12 per 1K. And I think that's kind of the dialogue that's kind of rubbing people the wrong way, some in the community, because you also have data in that report, which was not referenced today, about a 25% growth rate in short-term rental listings from Granicus since 2020 and a 50% growth rate since 2018. And I think if we talk about the potential like exponential effect of continued growth as we've watched the housing prices again since that date in Missoula and the housing stock issues kind of all happen on the same timeline, it feels a bit too coincidental to people to kind of dismiss it as a small issue. I also kind of want to comment that we've kind of followed in the footsteps of Bozeman slowly but surely in terms of housing prices and housing stock issues. And Bozeman has sort of followed in the footsteps of Jackson. And so we see like 35 is the issue in Missoula or in Bozeman, 35 of 1,000, and they are doing regulation. The idea of Missoula not doing anything because we're not quite to the next level strikes me as like just treading water because it's complicated rather than actually taking action where we could have a meaningful effect. So I kind of want to put that out there. We're talking a lot about like the fact that we don't really know, it's really nuanced, but like, what is the benefit of kind of continuing to allow exponential growth of STRs? There's also a lot of actual detractors for continuing to just sit by. It's not a passive or casual thing to keep monitoring it. There are negative impacts that continue to happen while we continue to do that. The next thing I just wanted to kind of add as an educational point, just to kind of like clarify a few things that were commented on. So short-term rentals do pay state lodging tax, as was discussed. That is new as of last legislative session. It was passed via SB 52 at the state legislature, but it is a pass-through tax. So the Airbnb is actually, or VRBO, are the agency that's responsible for collecting and remitting the tax from the guest end. That does not happen on the owner-operator end, just from a clarification purpose. I'd also just add that some of the way these rates and averages occupancies are calculated through Granicus can be kind of misleading to a casual person who looks at it. Like, for example, $150 average nightly rate does not really reflect that some of those units might be renting for $500 a night over a 3-month period in summer and like a $90 rate in the winter, where that could be much more profitable for that owner. And when you talk about how the problem here isn't as big because it's not like Whitefish, for example, like Whitefish has had, again, exponential tourism growth due to like a year-round industry with both ski and summer tourism, where Missoula's typically is more summer. But as that changes and grows, it will continue to be more of an issue here. Just a couple more quick things. When we talk about kind of scofflars, and there's a couple things I feel like I heard that are interesting to me. One, SB 52 does give the state access to how many people are paying, how many Airbnbs are actually reporting bed tax. So that is a way that you could also account for how many are actually operational, because that's definitely happening since Airbnb is the one collecting it on the booking engine side. If the state was cooperative in sharing that data with communities. And then second, I just want to sort of, again, the public say that the discussion of kind of making it easier for people to register, like shorter health inspections when they're effectively operating a business in a residential zone, strikes it as like making life easier for scofflars. And I feel like that's going to rub people the wrong way as well, as opposed to actually having them operate like a business if they're going to be a business. I heard a lot of what I feel like was kind of disingenuous comments about like, we don't know that these houses would end up back in the market if they were to go up, off of Airbnb listings, when like we could never know that. Like, we never know what someone's mind is going to be. But we do know we're still, the same folks are still sort of hypothesizing on the reasons, places might be occupied or not, because they're refugees versus the fact that they're tourists. And I feel like that comes across kind of disingenuous, like we either are or aren't. Did you want to say something, Heidi? I feel like
I just we have one more agenda item, and I really appreciate all your comments, and we usually cap folks at 3 minutes. Could you?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, could you send, if you have a list of things still, could you send those to us in writing, and then we can follow up and incorporate them? I just want to make sure the couple other folks in the audience who have their hands up have an opportunity.
I definitely will. I'll wrap it up right now by saying, just as a final comment, I would hope that any city council members or staff that are actively operating or owning Airbnbs would either provide a recusal to this conversation, or if it ends up in vote, or at least a disclosure of conflict of interest. And that is all that I have.
Thank you so much, Whitney. So I would like to go to the next person that has their hands up, and I think that is Bob. And I can't tell. Yeah. Go ahead, Bob Oakes.
Hi. I just wondered, I was familiar with the University of Montana study that was published last year. And I know that was incorporating data that they collected in 2020, but they had over 1,000 listings in Missoula at that time, as opposed to the Granicus 445. And I wondered if Granicus was familiar with that study, and they might have any explanations or theories as to why that number is so different now. Is that a COVID related thing or something else, or the way that they were counted originally? So if any of you know the answer to that, I'd be happy to hear.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Ricky, could you, or Montana, could you answer that real quick? I assume it has something to do with being able to take out the duplications across platforms.
Yeah, we don't know for sure, but we think, and based on our conversation with Granicus, it's the difference between listings versus units. Several units will list on multiple sites. And so if you're not, if you don't have access to the software that removes duplications, you'll get that fuller number of listings and not the number of individual units.
Thank you. All right, so the next person that has their hand raised is Kevin Hunt. And you should be able to unmute yourself.
I think I'm hearing me now.
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, thanks very much. I'd like to endorse everything I just heard from Whitney B. First of all, that scratched a lot of things off my list and a lot of questions off my list. I just have a few things. There's another bit of data that isn't covered in this study that nobody's aware of that I think you need to know about. And the Board of Realty at Bureau of Labor of Industries has opened now a disciplinary case against a realtor as a result of a complaint I filed about this that came to my attention as a result of postings on Nextdoor. But there is practice among certain real estate business persons in this community to send letters, mass letters out to members of especially wealthier neighborhoods, posing as modest means people or people who are moving into Missoula and really want to have a nice place, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and making overtures, to engender sympathy and empathy, and then buy the house. And then the idea is to turn, well, it turns out the guy that is being complained about, well, I complained about, also one of his gigs is developing, short-term rental and Airbnbs. So, I mean, this is a great amount of abuse. And this goes into another theme I have, which is the reason for, I think, wanting to collect some of that data that was mentioned that isn't currently available. It should be collected, because we need to not look at this as an isolated issue, STRs as an isolated issue, but of course how it affects the overall housing policy in Missoula, the housing crisis in Missoula, and how it affects policies such as density. Because we don't have this kind of information, I can make some hypotheses from these data too, and from prior hearings we've had recently. One of my hypotheses is that wealthier neighborhoods are protected by the current policies in Missoula against involuntary density. Another one I could say is that as far as,
hey, Kevin.
Yes.
I think we have one more agenda item that I think needs some discussion as well. And I think we're getting a little bit, I agree, it's related, a little bit off subject. Could you?
I'm not off subject, if I may respectfully say so. I'm definitely on point here. If I could just briefly, if I could conclude, then I will, if I'd be allowed to.
Go ahead.
I don't think I've had 3 minutes yet even, and I object. As far as the data regarding the payment of bed taxes, if in fact that is data that's available to the state government, and unless there's some reason that the right to know is outweighed by someone's right to individual privacy, we have a constitutional right to find that information out. So I don't understand what the problem is there. My final remark is this, just going back to my point about overall policies, I will just want to briefly touch on how all of this gets reported in the press. When the Rivera project was being reported, 70 quote unquote affordable units, that was called game changing. When this report, which is a wonderful report, it was well done, when that was reported in the press, the lead headline was that there aren't enough of these STRs to impact the housing situation in Missoula. And I don't understand how, when they are both coming from city people, how it is, these remarks, how it is that 70 units in Rivera's game changing and 485 STRs is not. And I think this is one of the reasons that some people think maybe there's a disingenuous narrative, and that's not your fault. But it needs to be looked at. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Kevin. And then we have one more agenda item on our docket, and it is an exciting item. So it is the Bridge Apartments, and Aaron Pehan, I believe, will introduce this item, and then so I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, and Heidi, if I could ask you to promote Christian Pritchard as well. He'll be joining us from Blue Line Development.
Let me see if I can figure out how to do that. Yes, okay. You should be being promoted.
Wonderful.
Maybe.
Right, good afternoon. Aaron Pehan, Director of Community Planning, Development, and Innovation with the City of Missoula. And we're here today to discuss a property management agreement and development option for the Bridge Apartments. Our department led the effort to acquire the Bridge Apartments, utilizing tax increment dollars to preserve permanently affordable homes and to prevent the displacement of 20 of our neighbors. I want to start today by reviewing the initial action to acquire the site. The Bridge is a small apartment complex at 1205 West Broadway, between Broadway and the Clark Fork River. There are 20 small one-bedroom rental homes in the complex, which also includes minimal common space for residents or tenants to gather. The Bridge was built by Western Montana Mental Health Center, a community-based nonprofit mental health center, in 1997 to provide affordable housing to community members consistent with Western Montana's mission. Here's just a quick aerial view to orient you to the site's location off Broadway. As all nonprofits evolve, Western Montana's priorities and capacities have changed since 1997, which led them to place the Bridge Apartments on the market. The mayor and staff pursued acquisition, and based on the very real reality that this property would transition to market rentals and that these tenants would be at risk for being displaced in a very tight rental market, increasing the chances that they would end up in our shelter system or on the street. Thankfully, Western Montana Mental Health Center accepted our backup offer of $2.1 million on the property, which came into play when the first or initial offer fell through. The city closed on the sale, becoming owners of the Bridge Apartments in late September of last year. And that purchase was, of course, made possible through tax increment financing and the support of the Missoula Redevelopment Agency's board of directors. So the acquisition of this property and the protection of affordable housing and the prevention of displacement of these 20 community members fit squarely with our adopted policies and stated goals at the city. They include our commitment in the strategic plan to create and preserve housing and to prevent the displacement of community members that can lead to houselessness. They also include our adopted housing policy, A Place to Call Home, and the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which was adopted by resolution in 2020. Our short-term efforts over the last 10 months have achieved our primary goals of preventing displacement and protecting or preserving that affordability. We've achieved zero displacement and worked to support tenants by partnering with Zilla State here in Missoula to provide temporary property management services, and by partnering with the Missoula Housing Authority to place housing choice vouchers on site for all eligible households, which represents all but one current tenant. And housing choice vouchers are issued through pass-through funding from the Department of Housing and Urban Development at the federal level, and ensure that a household will never pay more than 30% of their adjusted gross income towards their housing costs. So every tenant pays a different rental amount based on that calculation. We've also set in motion the preservation of affordability of this property now and well into the future. In December of 2021, we issued an RFP with the goal of locating a community partner to whom we can transfer ownership of the property, likely at a discounted sales price, so that they can own and manage the bridge as permanently affordable housing well into the future. The selected proposal of this public RFP process, which we are presenting to you today, is from Blue Line Development, Inc. Blue Line is an affordable housing developer and property manager with extensive experience in our community and across the Rocky Mountain West. They have 3 current development projects in Montana. These include the Villaggio and the Trinity, which council has heard a great deal about, and which will bring over 400 permanently affordable deed-restricted rental homes to our community. They also include an innovative new workforce development called Riverview Apartments in Big Sky. They have proven expertise in the use of low-income housing tax credits and the pairing and leveraging of those federal sources with private financing sources. This will be really important as we outline an exploration into the redevelopment of this site. And just as importantly, Blue Line currently manages over 800 permanently affordable rental homes across the Rocky Mountain West, 3 of which are here in Missoula. So not only do they have experience, but local experience in managing and operating affordable housing or affordable rental homes, which sometimes present unique barriers. Blue Line's proposal outlines a comprehensive plan for managing and redeveloping the site, utilizing a 2-prong approach to ensure day-to-day operation of the site over the next 5 years through a property management agreement, along with the exploration of redevelopment of the site that will help us assess the best path forward. Over the next 5 years, the city will maintain ownership of the site while Blue Line provides skilled and supportive on-site property management, during which time we'll work in partnership with Blue Line to explore redevelopment options with the goal of adding additional homes and better designed community spaces. One thing I want to highlight is that under any future plan, whether that includes merely a renovation of the site to address deferred maintenance, or if we determine the best path is full redevelopment of the site to add additional units that zoning and the land allotment would approve, that all current tenants will be eligible for benefits under the Uniform Relocation Act. What this means is that tenants can choose to be relocated temporarily in the case of a renovation, or even for the duration of a redevelopment, or permanently to another rental home of their choosing with their housing choice voucher and similar rent restrictions and services, meaning their rent would not increase from what they're paying today, and they would have a choice in where that housing is, or whether they would like to return to this site after any activity occurs. I want to be clear that the approach outlined on the slide that we're presenting to you today differs from what we had originally envisioned, which was to transfer the site, likely through a discounted sale, to a partner who could continue to operate it as is for the life of the building. However, through the RFP process, it became clear to us that deferred maintenance on site, all within the realm of what would be expected for the age of the building, having been constructed in 1997, just provided too large of a burden in today's cost environment where rehabilitation or renovation costs are increasing as much as 50% due to supply costs and labor shortages. The unpredictability of these costs, of the cost of managing the deferred maintenance, paired with the capped revenues that are necessary to protect this project as affordable housing, created too large of a hurdle for many affordable housing developers to navigate. We spoke during the RFP process with 6 different, very qualified and experienced affordable housing owners and managers across the Rocky Mountain West. Based on the current cost environment, all of them articulated to us that they simply could not submit a competitive proposal, so declined to submit anything at all. We are very grateful to Blue Line for the creativity that they presented to us in this proposal and feel like it provides immediate support through the property management agreement, while also providing the city the time that we need to explore options for this site, including a possible redevelopment to provide additional homes on the parcel and meet a broader need in our community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Affordable Housing Trust Fund Administrator, Emily Harris Shears, to talk to us about some of the details in the agreements that are before you.
Hi again. Erin, do you mind doing the slides? Thank you. So as Erin outlined, we are proposing to memorialize the relationship between the city and Blue Line in 2 key documents, the property management agreement and the development agreement. And I'm going to go through both of those now, just kind of the key terms of those. So the city will contract with Blue Line Property Management to provide on-site property management for the 20 units, which will include supporting tenants and the property with daily operations. And in exchange for property management services, Blue Line will receive a monthly management fee of 10% of the total amount of the gross rent and collections from tenants. Thank you. And then CPDI will approve a written rent schedule proposed by Blue Line, and all units in the bridge are restricted to households earning a maximum of 60% of area median income, which is equivalent to $39,180 for a household of 2, though many households in the property earn much less than the restricted 60%. And then rents, as Erin said, cannot exceed 30% of the household's income. And so this is kind of a departure from many rental properties where the rent is really based on the individual's circumstances and income rather than, a flat rate for 1 bedrooms, a flat rate, and all of the units in this are 1 bedrooms. So it's just something to know that people are receiving a person-centered rent approach as well. And then in addition to following the rent schedule, Blue Line will create and record a bookkeeping system for this property and submit monthly reports to CPDI, which will summarize expenses, vacancies, and unit status. And under the property management umbrella, Blue Line will be responsible for following the approved rent schedule, administering a consistent application process, which will include using a tenant selection plan, showing all prospective tenants available units, and informing applicants of denial decisions and reasons in writing. And additionally, Blue Line will comply with applicable laws and regulations, including the Fair Housing Act, the Violence Against Women Act, and the Montana Landlord Tenant Act. They're responsible for conducting unit inspections with the tenant at move-in and at move-out, responding to maintenance requests on a 24-hour basis, and supporting and promoting resident community engagement. and the conditions outlined in the property management agreement are considered standards of practice to ensure the safety, health, and ongoing housing stability for tenants. So the second key document is the development agreement, which provides Blue Line an exclusive 5-year window to explore the feasibility of redeveloping the Bridge Apartments to maximize density and resident amenity spaces on site. Under the 5-year development option, the city will not offer the property to another developer or list it for sale. The option can be extended if Blue Line applies for and is awarded low-income housing tax credit units, tax credits within the 5-year period, but the credit period is not closed before the agreement expires. And during the development option, the property will remain in the city's ownership. We're responsible for the capital expenditures, emergency repairs, and other costs associated with the property as they arise. And Blue Line is responsible for all pre-development related costs associated with the feasibility analysis. And it's anticipated that if redevelopment is planned, it will include low-income housing tax credits as a funding source. And so I'm just going to talk through what that expected or proposed relationship would look like. So a low-income housing tax credit partnership entity would be created. It's expected that Blue Line would be the developer and sponsor of the LIHTC project, and that Blue Line Construction would be the general contractor for the redevelopment. I'm good to go to the next. Yep, thank you. So if a redevelopment moves forward, the city will work with Missoula Housing Authority to secure project-based vouchers. Project-based vouchers provide subsidy to the unit and don't turn over with a specific tenant. So it allows for the unit to be rented at a fixed rate, guarantees that portion of rent, still provides the flexibility for the tenant based on their income, and benefits both the resident and the property management. And a LIHTC building or a low-income housing tax credit building has an initial compliance period, or sometimes you hear us talking about it as a period of affordability at the end of that of 15 years. And at the end of that first compliance period, Blue Line has as the general partner, has the option to purchase the investment partner's interest at a fair market value, essentially buying them out of the project. And the LIHTC or compliance period then continues for an additional 31 years for the extended use period. And the extended use period will not be impacted by the purchase of those credits. And I just want to also note that the period of affordability is at the discretion of the state, and they change it periodically through their QAP process. And so it can be longer. Just want to note that I was just talking to Heather from Homeward, and this year it's 50 years. So, but we're going with the standard of 46 for now. And so the recommended motion is up on the slide, and we're happy to answer questions.
And I just want to note as well that Christian Pritchard with Blue Line Development is here with us. He's joined our presentation today and can answer any questions that you might have of Blue Line as well.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I think I have two questions right off the bat. And my first question is, where is, I assume there's funding set aside somewhere in case there are some emergency expenses the city has to pay for. And I was wondering kind of what the amount is that you've envisioned that would be needed to be set aside and where that is housed.
Yeah. So when we purchased the bridge apartments, there were no operational reserves that were on hand or that transferred at sale. But we did address a lot of the more costly deferred maintenance, especially as it applies to systems prior to closure of the sale. That means all of the HVAC systems were replaced. There was some mold mitigation in attic spaces that was completed prior to that transition of ownership. So those costs did not transition to the city of Missoula. We are working to rebuild an operational reserve through monthly rental payments, and our hope would be that we don't see any major system failures that would exceed the operational reserves that we're able to build through those monthly rental revenues. But that is a risk that if there was a major system failure, we would have to identify some funding sources to support that. We could make an application to ourselves as well that we have funding through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, CDBG, home funds, and other funds that could support major system failures, new roofs, whatever might come as a deed restricted permanently affordable housing site as well. And so we have some options in that realm.
Thank you. And then my second question is, I guess around, obviously this agreement is governed by all of applicable state laws, but does Blue Line in their management, I guess Blue Line can answer this question, have any additional maybe restrictions on who they rent to, like who their tenants would be?
Hi, good afternoon. This is Christian Pritchett with Blue Line. So we would work closely with the city just to develop the tenant selection plan and the priorities of the city. At the corporate level, we don't further restrict beyond any of the regulatory agreements associated with the various funding sources and the developments that we either manage or own and manage. And so it's really at the discretion of the city here on how we choose to target within the tenant selection plan. But aside from that, we would not add any additional restrictions.
Thank you. That's great. Does anybody else have any questions about this item? No. Right, in that case, then I think looking for a motion, and then we'll go to public comment and council comment. Amber.
I'd be happy to make the recommended motion and speak to it whenever that time is appropriate.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Amber. I'll turn it over to public comment right now. So if there's anyone in the public who would like to comment on this item, please raise your hand. And I am not seeing a slew of hands going up, so I'll turn it back over to you, Amber.
Thanks, that was quick. I don't have anything to say other than I'm happy to support this. I think this is a great opportunity, and anytime we can save and create affordable housing, I'm happy to be advocating for it. So thank you for all your work on this to all of you.
All right, yeah, and I just would like to add that I know this isn't quite what was envisioned when it was purchased, but I really appreciate the flexibility in coming up with something that gets us to maintaining these units as affordable units in Missoula, and coming up with something that, even though it's a 5-year plan, is really reflects, I think, the challenges that many developers are having in our community, and especially those that are developing affordable units. It is very challenging to build units that that meet the needs of very low income residents in Missoula. So thanks for putting this together and doing the outreach and finding someone who's willing to do this. So with that, I guess we'll go to a roll call vote.
Becerra?
Yes.
Contos?
Yes.
Hess?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Nugent?
Yes.
Savage?
Yes.
Cheryl?
Yes.
Vasika?
Yes.
West?
Yes.
9 yes, 0 no. Motion is approved.
All right, thank you so much. That was our last agenda item and we are finishing on time. So thank you so much and we'll be adjourned.